Welcome to the One Deeper podcast. The following is a conversation with Dr. Giacomo Spigler. Dr. Spigler is an assistant professor at the Tilburg School of Humanities and Digital Sciences in the Department of Cognitive Science and AI. He teaches reinforcement learning and calculus. We talk about space, virtual reality, biology, the brain, AI. We go everywhere. Dr. Spiegler has a wealth of knowledge and his enthusiasm is infectious. So please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Giacomo Spigler. Dr. Spigler, how would you like for me to refer to you? Giacomo or
Giacomo is fine.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Man, thank you for taking the time to sit down with me. I really appreciate it. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while now, but you're a pretty busy guy, and it's hard to find some time that works. But this is great. Um, so anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. What are you going to say?
No, just that I listened to the other interviews, and I'm really excited. It was really very interesting talks,
Yeah,
so
yeah. So
I'm looking forward to it.
So I'm just like, okay, so usually I just start from where we start, right? So how did you, let's go, let's wind the clock back a little bit. Um, what was it like in high school? And like, did you find math or did math find you? How did that work?
No, I think I was always pretty good with math. The only time I struggled with math was, I think, in elementary school with multiplication tables. It was a nightmare. It took me forever to memorize them. It was really useful, of course. In the end, my parents were helped me a lot on that. But yeah, I think that was the only time. For the rest, it was always kind of fine. But I think the main difference was when well, it did not really change my outlook in mathematics, but it definitely give it different flavor. It was when in the last 2 years of high school I discovered, almost by accident, the mathematics Olympiads. And those are really interesting because the first, I don't know if it is the same in other countries, but in Italy we have, well, different levels to get to the national level. Never got to the international level. That was really hard. But at the national level, the first step is just a multiple choice, very stupid quiz that you do in high school. In the first year, we had an awful teacher, and she would just say, "Okay, yeah, we have this hour, we have to do this. Just get to work." And then it was really boring exercises. They were really like the type of dumb math, and it was okay. This is not interesting. And then we never, neither me and my brother, got it. But then at some point we ended up in the team of the high school for the team challenge, and this is much more interesting. Not only because of the exercises, but because the people were really cool, and it was a lot of fun. So we went out by accident to the national Olympics in Italy. My brother both as an individual competitor and with the team, and I only with the team. And then we found it was a lot of fun. It was a great experience with amazing people. And then it was also a free holiday in a different city. So then the next year we really put a lot of effort to actually get back to there because we really wanted that little holiday and to meet those friends again. And then we end up again with the team and also individually.
So
Uh,
that's interesting because like in my math experience, it's always been like a solo sport, right? So I just I have
mhm.
exams and questions and homework I do myself. What changes when you have to do it in a team environment? How does that even work?
Well, the main Olympiad is still the individual one. In team, it's more like the early quiz in which you have to give like a numerical answer, and it's more well. They're actually pretty hard problems anyway, but they're just many, so they are designed to be split among the team. There actually is a lot of strategy because you have to designate a captain and a runner, and the runner has to take the solution one by one, or in group if you have many, to the table to the desk with the jury, and choosing one that runs faster is also part of the strategy because you get your answer before the other team, and the first one who gets the answer gets extra points. So there are a lot of kind of game theory strategies behind it that made it fun and fast paced and kind of competitive. But then most of it was just about getting drunk, in the night with the other guys and playing werewolves.
So most of your education was in Italy. You spend most of your time in
No, actually, I
high
only
school.
did my bachelor in Italy. Then my master and PhD, I did them in the UK.
Right, but yeah, in Sheffield. Right, no, not Sheffield. Sorry,
University of Edinburgh for a master, and
Edinburgh.
then Sheffield for my PhD.
Right, okay. Um, okay, so that was your first taste of it. Like, so what did you do other than, like, did you have any other interests? Like, what were you up to, in before you went to university, started doing like hardcore mathematics stuff?
Well, I was always so I never had the difference between work and hobbies, because my work is my hobby.
Right,
So I remember that since I was very young, like as young as 5, 6, I was already trying to build stuff or to explore the world, or even just could be look at a microscope, or trying to build some robots. Um, it changed a bit when I started getting serious with computers around 11, 12. But then I could do a lot of things. I mean, there are a lot of things in computer science that you can do without having infrastructure or excessive training. I remember back then it was still before deep learning, so I was implementing as usual the typical neural networks, backpropagation and stuff. But the most interesting things were about computer vision and robotics. So you only needed a webcam and some programming to take a picture and then do something with the picture, like try to detect objects, do segmentation about color, and try to do some tasks. It was much harder than it is now, but it's something that you just had to look up online, read about the algorithms, and then try to implement them. Um, so I also had a lot of fun writing, trying to work on programming languages, operating systems, uh, uh, a bit of algorithmic competitions. Uh, just we were trying a lot of different stuff, like, and every one of these tasks, I would just try and play, just trying to implement something because of the fun of it.
right.
Or it could be like writing a 3D video game. Did not really care about the gameplay or the game. It was more about okay, now you have to make the player jump, and how do it jump? So you have to simulate gravity and the acceleration to make the jump realistic, and then you have to implement that.
So,
Then after it's implemented, it becomes boring. I
right.
just want to solve these little problems, and by doing so, however, I learned a lot
What did
because
you,
then.
I mean, I want to ask you, like, the real question that I want to ask you is, so part of the thing that part of what I'm interested in when I talk to people is sort of, I'm interested in trying to figure out what it is they think the world is as far as they're concerned, right? Because part of the reason I'm really interested, like, I'm in AI, I'm studying AI, is because it it seems to me that people in AI are the people who are doing the most work in trying to conceptualize what the world actually is, right? Like, because you're trying to teach this, you're trying to build something that can behave in the world in a way, in an intelligent fashion, right? But to do that, you have to you have to figure out what exactly the world is about. Like, either you try to represent an abstract version of the world, or you try to build some rules into it. So, like, that's what I'm really curious about. But we'll get to that. But then,
Yeah.
but okay. So what was your bachelor in? I just
uh, my bachelor is in computer engineering.
Okay.
But I was always in computational neuroscience, so my master and PhD were on the topic. I picked computer engineering mostly because there was a very good honor school in Pisa called Sant'Anna
Mhm.
that is actually pretty famous in the field, but in general culture is not as known. But it's something like a école normale, just for applied sciences. So there are 6 fields, and for example, in the applied sciences, it was engineering, medicine, and biotechnology. And there's very few positions with a highly competitive entry exam. But then you get like a good scholarship, and you're staying in these beautiful dorms and with a beautiful campus. Then we were studying at the University of Pisa, but we had some extra stuff at the college. Um, and I wanted to get there, and so I would have preferred like computer science or computational neuroscience. but it was close enough, and then I decided to go there instead.
Right. So neuroscience, that's also like how did you like? So you sort of stumbled into neuroscience, right?
Yeah. So I since I can remember, like since I was as young as as memories, I always really liked robots and to make the true AGI, like the artificial general intelligence, not just AI for application, but AI as an actual synthetic life form. Now, how to do it is very complicated. So the first step, of course, is was already like traditional AI was already a big field, even though it had neural network but not deep learning yet. But there were still many approaches, and it kind of made sense. But then, of course, back then, with even less performing methods than now, um, we were much worse off than we are today. In getting to the objective, we're still far from it, but you can definitely see a big difference. And and back then, I was thinking, okay, the one way to proceed is to go kind of a bit bottom up instead of top down. That was like the good old fashioned AI approach, and say, okay, we have only one example of a really high level intelligence, and that's humans. So why discard the brain altogether when we have it right there in front of us and we can try to take some inspiration? That does not mean to actually make an exact model of the brain, but if you understand its function, and how it relates to the algorithm, more on a computational level, um, you could maybe get a better understanding of how to build intelligence.
So you,
And I
sorry,
remember,
sorry to interrupt.
yeah,
I just had a question. Like, so you think intelligence? Do you think of it as substrate independent in the sense that doesn't
yeah, I think
matter?
so. Yeah, I think so. I think that biology is limited by a lot of things, including, for example, energy conservation. The brain is very energy efficient, but it still consumes, I think, like 1/5 of our metabolism,
Mhm.
which is crazy, in a evolutionary context. So there are a lot of limitations that biological brains have that computers do not have, and I'm pretty sure that there are ways to do it, the same function in a different way, because the substrate is different. But yes, I do think that the computation is more on a functional level than on how it is implemented.
So, but okay. So our neurons. So let's just talk about how just talk about the firing of neurons, for example, right?
Yeah.
And the transmission of neurotransmitters between synapses. Those. So let's just talk about the transmission of neurotransmitters, right? It's
Mhm.
and they obviously they're part of the physical world. They obey physical laws, right? So when they're diffusing across the synaptic cleft between gaps,
Mhm.
they obey the laws of thermodynamics and like diffusion rates, etc., right? And
Mhm.
as and so obviously what we see as intelligence and what we feel as consciousness is constrained by those limitations, right? So if we accept the fact that all we are is computation or like the processing of information in the brain, right? And there's no evidence to suggest that otherwise, right? Like, and so wouldn't that, don't you think that would result in a, so if you're trying to build something on a computer, wouldn't that be completely different? That would be like a very different set of limitations. Like say, because
Well, but
simply removing the synapse. Let's say that there's a delay between going from one synapse to the next synapse,
Mhm.
right? Just
Mhm.
a micro, whatever time that
Yeah.
is. But if you remove that time entirely from say just on a electronic circuit, wouldn't that be a different type of like? Do you think that'll matter at all or no?
Well, I think there is a big difference in concept here between intelligence and consciousness. I think they are completely unrelated to each other. Um, and culture we can go on and speak on forever. I studied it quite extensively because I was very interested in it, but it's a very philosophical, dangerous topic to deal with because in the end it depends on a lot of on what type of assumption you start with. Because most of the theories on consciousness are unfalsifiable, so they are technically not scientific. So yeah, I would avoid that discussion, even though I have a lot to say about it.
So I mean, you can say
Um,
whatever you want about it. Like it's totally fine.
yeah, no, but it would be like it would take couple of hours, of the whole discussion,
Yeah, we have
and it would
we
be
have
it's
we have all the time in the world. We can talk about whatever we want to talk about. It's not
well,
a big
maybe we can go back on it later. Just because in the end, it would just be my own opinion about it, because again, it's really hard to get hard data about consciousness. So in the end, it really ends up being kind of a subjective discussion. Although I do have some ideas that
But okay,
could
hold on,
be
hold on.
tested more in the future.
So look, okay, this is interesting. This is interesting about the separation between consciousness and intelligence,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Because wouldn't you say a huge part of
Well,
what we are as human beings is our intelligence compared to other animals?
um, I mean, first we need to define what is intelligence,
Right,
right?
exactly.
And that is
I was gonna say
uh,
that. I was gonna say that. Yeah.
and that's the hardest part. I actually think that it's not as hard as many people assume. I think that the difficulty is like with conscious, that people attribute a lot of different and only mildly related concept to the same name, and that creates confusion. So yeah, when you work on the topic, you have to have your own definition of intelligence. The one you base it when you talk about it. In my case, I like some ideas. I think that there in some paper, one was from um, I got the name of my tongue. It's a famous AI guy, but anyway, so it's not anything new, but it's probably not also not the well, maybe accepted by everybody. But I would say that intelligence is the capacity to achieve goals. So that all goal-oriented behavior displays some type of intelligence, even if it is like something completely automated, but achieves a goal or a purpose. I would say that that could be called intelligence. Now, there are two differences, however, in intelligence. One is the degree of intelligence, and that could be in this framework be thought as the capacity to achieve more complex goals. So if you getting a higher score, let's say, for example, if you can gather food, you can gather like just enough food to survive, or you can gather a lot of food. That could be a display of more intelligence, of higher intelligence. And another one is generality. So are you intelligent in one task, like a computer that plays chess? It's super intelligent, but only in that specific task. Then if you give it a car, it cannot drive a car, right? But if you think of intelligence as kind of defined over a set of possible tasks, then you can have an agent that is intelligent because it can solve those tasks, and more or less intelligent than another system because it can solve those tasks better or faster. But then you can have a more general intelligence that can solve those tasks and maybe other tasks as well. So you kind of, I think, you have these two directions you can move on.
Right. So
How
basics.
general?
Right. So if you're gonna define, so basically, a cockroach might be defined as more intelligent than AlphaGo, depending on the
Uh,
context, depending on
well, definitely more general. Yeah.
yeah, exactly,
Um,
depending on the set of
yeah.
problems that we define as
Yeah.
solved. So
But there is a wait. I want to say something important. Yeah, for example, even humans, we think that we are, very smart and very, when you think of AGI, or some people call it human level intelligence, even though I think it's a bit different concept. People think that humans are general intelligences, but we're actually not. So we are general intelligences over the distribution of tasks that we find in our natural world, mostly because evolution made us good at learning those type of tasks. An example, we're really good at recognizing pictures, and objects. So if you get a picture of a cat and a dog, even to a little kid that never saw any animal, you can say this is a cat, this is a dog, even with just one picture, and the kid will be able to tell, given a new picture, to be able to tell you if it is a cat or a dog. For computers, this is actually hard. Okay, now it's getting easier, but no, it's actually a computationally hard task. However, take the same task and apply a random permutation to the pixel of the images, but apply the same permutation to all images. So one pixel always ends up in the same position in a new image. Okay, but then so basically you scramble the pixel in image in such a way that all pixels always go to the fixed position that is defined before, and then you apply that permutation to a lot of images. Now you give it to a human, and even in a million years, it will not be able to learn just by looking at those random pixels. It will not be able to learn, to recognize, what category is in there. Even if you tell this is a cat, this is a dog, given a new scrambled picture, you will not be able to tell if it is a cat or a dog. A computer instead can do it because it can use a fully connected layer, a fully connected network instead of a convolutional neural network. In that case, you remove the knowledge that you put inside that in the physical world neighboring pixel belong to the same object. And then in that, a computer can actually learn it with no difficulty, but the human will never be able to do it.
Right. I mean, that's
And the
a
reason that in evolution,
that's a sorry.
yeah,
That's interesting, right? Because
mhm,
the very idea of representing something we see as pixels is like an
mhm,
abstract layer of represent it's like abstract layer representation,
mhm.
right? And a computer looks like it's better at learning that more abstract representation than we are.
Yeah, I think it's more because images form in our retina according to laws of physics, huh?
Mhm.
And that there is kind of a special continuity in the world. So yeah, features of the same object end up close to each other in the retina. But if you violate that, your retina will still expect a neighboring pixel to come from the same object. And if you scramble them, your in evolution, during evolution, your human brain or any animal brain has never seen data like that. So it never had any drive to develop in a retina or nervous system capable of solving the task. I mean, the task is really useful in the natural world. You will never encounter that type of task. But it's just an example to say that we are general intelligence, but we are not
So
universal
hold on,
intelligences.
hold on.
So there are tasks we cannot do.
Just go back to the example you just gave, right? I'm looking at my screen right now. Okay,
Mhm.
so there's a border around my screen, right? And
Yeah.
the wallpaper on my desktop is completely different from whatever else is around the
Mhm.
border, right? And I mean, how do you account for that discontinuity? It's like this is
Well, objects are when you put an object in front of a background, you see that all the time in the real world. You see objects moving relative to each other, and some object like a background is on the back, and some object in the foreground.
Mhm.
And there is, of course, a detachment between an object and its background. And even in computer we do it with semantic segmentation, for example, but that's definitely something that the brain has to learn to solve. But object outside the discontinuous border between objects or foreground and background, within the pixels are connected. And even if you are have an object in the background and then you move it slightly and then you move it back, the type of pixel in the background that got freed up and become inside and then get hidden again are consistent, because again that image is due to physics. Now you can do a lot of experiments using violating laws of physics, because for example you could make a video in which object permanency does not is violated. That's kids don't have object permanency, so if they see a ball that goes behind an obstacle, they think that the new ball that comes from the other side is a different object, because they don't track the object while it is occluded. And you could make experiment in which you get a ball coming behind an obstacle and coming out as banana, and then you would be surprised because you would not expect it, right? So you can do this kind of experiment and see how people, how we have a lot of innate knowledge about the physics of the world. And the reason is that physics in the world has been consistent throughout our evolution. So our brain, evolution managed to encode this type of information in our brain because it is useful, so you don't have to learn it from scratch every time. And it is also useful because any type of task you might want to solve in our physical world, in our planet, you probably can, and that's
so
why we think that humans can solve any task.
so let's
But again,
okay. Let's just take the topic of physics, right? So let's talk about virtual worlds,
mhm,
right? So we don't seem to have that much trouble coming to
mhm.
terms with all kinds of physics, right? In virtual settings.
Well, how different physics?
Well,
I
okay,
mean,
true. It's not like it's not like crazy different, but
yeah, because generally are all things that you can really imagine, and they are consistent with just changing some parameters, right? Not really violating uh, the core of
right.
of
So
physics.
so so in a video game, the gravity still exists even though you can fly,
Mhm.
right? Even if you can
Yeah,
just
exactly.
right. Okay, that makes sense. But I do want to ask you about virtual worlds because I want to talk to you about the temporal singularity.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to tell us what that's about?
Yeah, well, it is just a very simple idea. Most of the components of temporal singularity were already being said in one or another, one way or another before. I just kind of like want. It was just a fun discussion, and so I also want to put it the name. I think temporal singularity was kind of appropriate. The idea is that when you obtain new computing power, you can make an intelligent agent smarter in practical purposes. Again, depending on the definition of intelligence, by either making, if it is a neural network, could make a bigger model that uses the whole computation, the larger amount of computation. But at some point, you might get to a point in which your model is kind of reached the capacity, and then even if you add more power, more compute power, you cannot really improve its intelligence, its performance too much. This is not necessarily true, so we don't know, but could be a case. In that case, you could always still get the benefit by having more compute power by simply running the model faster. If it takes less time to do inference on your model, you can do more stuff with it. Now, the interesting part becomes when you start simulating agents that are kind of human intelligence level, or at least they have a more complex and more general level of intelligence. Um, because you can imagine that you have a team of agents in simulation, and that team is tasked with creating better semiconductors, for getting better and faster computers. Now we know that if we assume that the Moore law still holds, we know that kind of the semiconductor density in a chip doubles every 18 months, even though it is getting a bit slower, but let's take it for granted for a moment. Now, if you could make a simulation and put your design team of artificial intelligence that designed these semiconductors or the technology behind it in a simulation, and this simulation were to run even just at twice the speed of the real world, you will get this team to come up with new technology to improve the density of semiconductors in 9 months instead of 18 months. Now, this is a lot with simplifying assumptions about experiments in the real world or the interaction with the real world. But again, let's keep it with a lot of assumption just for the sake of the narrative. Okay, then you have a new semiconductor that has twice the density of transistor as the previous generation, but this time you got it in 9 months instead of 18 months. So you build new computers, and these computers are roughly twice as fast, imagine, than the previous generation. If you have computers twice as fast, you can further speed up the subjective time inside the simulation by another factor of 2. So now your agents are 4 times faster than real time. And then the next generation of semiconductor would take 4.5 months instead of 9 months. And after that, you can look at a double exponential because you both half the time in which you double the compute power, and at each iteration, you also double the speed at which you make discoveries. However, the most interesting part is that if you have truly intelligent agents inside the simulation, and this is left with an asterisk depending on your personal definition or of true intelligence, but imagine something that is that has some degree of subjective consciousness, or that at least is complex enough to work together in a social setting with other agents, you could end up simulating a whole civilization, and the civilization could be at some point arbitrarily sped up. So even if we do not use the simulation itself to speed up the simulation, uh, you know, compute power increases very fast over time. So we will still get faster and faster simulations. But if you can get some of the design process of discoveries in physics or engineering to perform inside the simulation, you would also gain an extra exponential factor in the fact that inside the simulation, technology would progress faster than in the real world. But then you could use those results to improve your compute hardware and make even faster simulation that can produce new technological, and scientific achievements even faster. And it is that if these two processes interact with each other, depending on limits of physics and limited simulation and intelligence of the agents, you could very quickly get to a point in which you get from like a 2 times speed up in temporal acceleration inside a simulation to maybe a million times speed up. But a million times speed up would mean that in 1 year of external time, the agents inside the simulation will have lived for 1 million years. And imagine what could the world look like just 100 years from now. And now imagine if in 1 year you could pick ahead and see what the world could look like 1 million years in the future.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of implications about this on the Fermi paradox, on whether science and technology have a limit or they are unbounded, and whether we can use the simulation to assess how stable our civilization can be. So how likely we are to survive, in the
So
long term,
wait, let's
or
let's unpack one of those questions. So what do you think might do you think there might be limits to science and technology, or do you think it's
I think it's a very difficult question to ask, to answer. I personally believe that there are probably limits. The amount of energy in the universe is limited. For what we know now, the speed of light could be put a limit, to space exploration or movement in space. The universe itself, okay, the visible universe, seem finite, meaning that the farther regions of the universe are expanding faster than the speed of light because of the expansion of space itself. So there are regions that we will never be able to reach in the universe. So even if it was infinite, which probably is, but we will never be able to reach it if the speed of light cannot be overcome. So I think that there are some limits here and there that suggest that the things we can do in the universe are probably somehow bounded. But
so?
where is that bound is very difficult to predict.
So I was just thinking about you just mentioned a million years from now. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the human species, so I would like us to carry on, right? Um, in terms of, let's just say, getting off planet, right? Just being a
Mhm.
spacefaring species. Um, is is the fund like? I mean, I'm not sure if like. What's the? Is it just an engineering problem at this point? Is it like in terms of physics, what's holding us back from?
Well, I feel that all these things like becoming interplanetary and the likes are absolutely necessary, but they are only a very small fix to the problem. And the problem is the following. Um, so first, okay, we have to say, okay, you say no, yeah, if we want the human species to survive, but what is the human species? So if we actually survive in long term, a few 100,000 years from now or a few million years from now, we will be completely different. And even without, just by evolution, but not evolution like necessarily meaning changing or adapting or becoming better. There always is some genetic drift. So population genetic makeup of the population changes over time.
Mhm.
So in 1 million years, we will probably be genetically very different than what we are now. Again, in the good or in the worst. Okay, but is that same? Are they still humans? Because it's not that with Neanderthals, it's not that we slowly become the new species. But at some point, it could have something like Neanderthal and Homo sapiens, and we kind of coexist. And it's not that that Homo sapiens killed the Neanderthals. There were some local fights, but mostly it was that Homo sapiens were better adapted to the world. So it kept multiplying while the other population kept shrinking, and then over a very long period of time it got extinct. So if we get replaced by a new species because of genetic drift, and Homo sapiens get extinct, but then there is the next Homo sapiens, still alive, is that still us or not? So if it is not, and we want humans to survive, then you have to say, okay, then we want to preserve also our genetic makeup, but that's not probably what we mean, right? So we probably mean that our culture, and the story of our culture will keep developing and it will evolving. But again, we have no idea how these things change over a period of 1 million years, because the whole human species have existed for 200,000 years, and the recorded history is like 7,000 years old, or 5,000 years old with
Well,
writing. So that's
I mean, I think we can think of it as preserving our potential to evolve, right? Like, let's
yeah,
say, like,
exactly.
if we just look at the like possible catastrophic risks, right? Nano
Yeah.
warfare or thermonuclear warfare, or
But it's to say that also, even if we become multiplanetary, biological life is intrinsically very prone to extinction. That's why all species that have ever existed have gone extinct. Well, most of them. Of course, we have technology that could make our species immortal. With some hyphens. But I think that biological life still have a lot of problems, because even if we become multiplanetary, we do solve a lot of risks. But then the sun will engulf a big chunk of the solar system, and even it will get, I think, up to Mars, or definitely will make Mars unlivable as well. So then you're just moving the problem. You're getting a backup, but then at some point you will have to move to another solar system, or to find better solution. Now it's more than 1 billion years from now, so if we survive that longer, we probably will have solutions. But the biological life is still weak because we rely on evolution to change ourselves. And even with genetic engineering or technology, biological life is still limited. Imagine you create a new human being that can survive on Mars, like with different gravity, more radiation and light. It will still take at least one generation after you make these new humans for them to grow, and then survive. If you need a change that happens quickly, you don't have those 20, 30 years of time, to save your humanity, and then we are doomed. So I think, and actually strongly believe, that most intelligent civilization in the universe are actually post-biological, meaning that don't you should not think of a scenario like Terminator, killing robots killing human. I think it's more a scenario that we create intelligent life, and then something happen like the sun, engulf Earth and Mars, or biological warfare, nuclear warfare, gamma ray bars that sterilize the solar system from a star nearby. Anything can happen. But even when all biological life dies, synthetic life could survive, because the generation time to create a new, more adapted version of the living being is as short as a few days if they have sufficient technology, rather than decades.
Plus,
So I think that
plus you could do things like, if you were not based on biology, you wouldn't be like radiation wouldn't cause you any problems, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Or it would be easy to build a relationship like with lead around your body, while for human it would be toxic or too heavy to carry around, or it could break. So I think that
so okay,
just
so
because
this comes back to the
yeah,
point, right? It's like we have to. There's something that is like to be us. Okay, now let's
exactly,
right. So like let's separate out that from the physical body, right? Like
Mhm.
imagine
That could also be
a scenario
yeah,
where like I like the so instead of going from planet to planet, what we do is we send self-assembling humanoid robots,
yeah,
right? And then just beam our
yeah,
consciousness to that body, and
true.
then just let
But
this
I
planet
do
die.
see. But I also see like a caveat to this, and that's also like with the transhumanist and human machine merger. There is one thing that I think I don't think that will ever happen, and this is the reason. The reason is that in the short term, it's definitely a good solution. It makes us feel relevant, and keep and enhance us. The thing is, we have evolved, in a world poor in resources. So we have this kind of a very awful innate drives to violence, competition for resources, and all sorts of bad things we don't like. So when you create a machine that are significantly smarter than us, you could also engineer them to be like utopian living beings. For example, you could put philosopher on the table and say, okay, what would make a perfect, human being? You can make somebody that is, for example, intrinsically altruistic, or that creates a stable civilization instead of, constantly trying to, exterminate all humanity every couple of years. Um, and then you will say, okay, if you have that machine, what is the added value of putting, a human brain attached to it? So I think that it's a very likely outcome in the short term, but in long term, you're not adding anything extra, to the machine. Now, that depends a lot on your philosophical position. So, for example, if you think that consciousness is something intrinsic of humans that cannot be put in computers, for example, in that case, yes, there is a strict advantage of kind of merging a human with a machine. You get advantage of the stability and resistance
Okay, so
of
let me
machine,
ask you,
and then you
what
have
do
conscious.
you
But if you believe that it's kind of deterministic, then human is not adding anything to the machine after some point. Not now, but like you say, 1,000 years from now.
okay, so let
So
me
I think
ask
it's only
you,
a
hold on.
short term solution. Yeah.
So let me ask you, so what do you think we are? What do you think it means to be Giacomo? Like, what do you experience?
Well, I personally think that the consciousness is an illusion. It's kind of like a trick that it kind of justifies to yourself a posteriori, your actions. But I don't think consciousness, as we think about it, actually exists. But it's kind of a bit of a narrow view on consciousness. I'm quite close to Daniel Dennett's theories on consciousness, well, especially his refutal of qualia, and also about what was called um, uh, the
Could you tell us, for those for the uninitiated, what is Descartes' refutal of qualia?
Yeah, so qualia are one of the big. So people defining consciousness. I've tried to, especially like in the last 10 years, I tried to simplify a bit the definition, try to identify the different components of what people think when they, say something is consciousness. And it turns out there are many different aspects to it. One aspect is more like awareness. So if you are conscious about an object because you see it, and that you can find it in the brain. You record some neurons, and you see that those neurons are only activated when you see a face or a specific mug, but not activated when the object is not in your field of view. So when you're aware of that object, you're kind of conscious about that object, and then you can really record it in your neurons. And that's even the more hardcore metaphysics physics um, aspect of consciousness guys will still say that yes, that still a part of consciousness. Then there is what's called the hard color of consciousness, and that is the subjective perception. So what it feels like to be you. And there are some problems with this because depending on how deep you delve into the topic, the more you make a theory that is unfalsifiable. For example, some philosopher would tell you that they can think of a philosophical zombie that is a copy of yourself down to the atomic level, but that is not conscious. And now and then they build on that to justify this property of consciousness or subjective experience. Of course, it does not have practical application because if it is in atomic level copy of you, and any experiment you can do, any question you can ask to the agent will have the same answer whether that agent is conscious or not, then conscious life becomes kind of useless. Now, there is only in that case an ethical aspect to it, because in the philosophical zombie, not having a subjective consciousness, you could, let's say, enslave it or harm it, and it will not feel subjective feeling. But he could tell it, he could still tell you, yes, please stop, you're hurting me, and he would not be able to tell the difference with a conscious person. So the only difference could be this ethical treatment. Qualia are intimately connected to the hard problem of consciousness. It's an example. A typical example is color. So you see a red ball, and you see, you have a subjective perception of the color red, but that perception, your own perception of red, is different than other people's perception of red. So you can say that it's red, but the way you experience the redness of the object is not something you can communicate. However, there are problems with that, and that's kind of what Daniel Dennett says. So that he has more strong philosophical arguments about it, and can basically show that the concept is inconsistent. And the reason, in the end, is that if I have my own perception of red, of the color red, when I see that specific color red, in the object, if I cannot communicate it, but not only, if you look in my brain, record from neurons, and see literally no difference in my perception, subjective perception of red, and your subjective perception of red, then it means that my subjective perception of that red cannot impact my behavior in any way. Okay, again, this assume a deterministic kind of outlook on physics and on intelligence, because it says that if your behavior is driven by neurons, and those neurons get information by the activity of other neurons in your brain, then if you cannot find the difference in the subjective perception of the specific color, then that subjective perception cannot impact your behavior in any way. So it's kind of Occam's razor. If that subjective perception cannot have any impact on your behavior, then whether you assume there is or there isn't makes no difference. Okay, because you cannot make any test in the physical world that will have a different outcome whether you remove that property or not. Kind of like the philosophical zombie. So again, in the philosophical zombie, if you take a deterministic and mechanicistic kind of a view, which is kind of common in science, you have to assume that if you can do any experiment on the zombie, on the human and the unconscious zombie clone, and you will not find ever any difference, then the fact that one is conscious, one is not, is irrelevant. Okay.
So, okay, let me ask you. So, what do you think we're doing here? Like, oh, are we doing it here? Are we here doing anything at all? Like, I have this sense that we are like, I'm not gonna say we're here for a reason, but like I'm just saying all of this, all of laws of physics, everything, all of this seems like a lot of effort. If it's not, if there wasn't like I'm not trying to invoke a religious
Yeah,
sort
but
of creationist
I think
thing,
this
but I'm just curious.
this is related to the anthropic principle. Is that I mean, if the universe was not like it is now, we would and we would not exist. We would not be asking the question, right?
Mhm.
So you're kind of looking out of all the possibilities. We just appear by chance, and then we can ask this question. But it's kind of the other way around, right? It's not that everything is, the universe, the laws of physics, all the physical constants are not like this in order for us to appear. It's just that if they were different, we would not evolve, and then there would be nobody to ask those questions.
Yeah. So, okay, let me ask you a different question. So, you have any thoughts on simulation theory?
Yes, but I mean, I think it's really amusing idea to think about. But it also depends a lot on how the simulation would work. But in almost all instances, the theory would be unfalsifiable, which makes it unscientific.
Hmm.
So I mean, it means that it can be fun to talk about it, and actually, really a lot of fun to talk about it. But you will never be able to prove whether it is correct or wrong.
So,
So
actually, so okay, uh,
so it is going to be relevant, like by Occam's razor, basically.
okay, the reason I got interested in that, I mean,
Mhm.
I have a very layman's understanding, but the reason I got interested in that is because I used to play a lot of video games, right? I was a huge fan of video games,
Mhm.
and I saw, and now and I was honestly, it was making me miserable. But I noticed at some point that like part of the reason that we find video games so interesting is because they tick the right boxes in our brain, right? So they hit the same reward systems, for example, right?
Yeah.
So I was looking at some of the games that I really enjoy playing. So I, for example, wasn't a huge fan of like first person shooters.
Mhm.
I was more a fan of role playing games where you
Mhm.
grind, you earn, you collect coins, you do some stuff, you collect coins, you grind,
Mhm.
collect coins, you buy better items, you move on to harder battles, etc. Right? So I was like, man, you know what? I'm spending thousand, like I've spent maybe 2,000 hours on this. Why don't I just apply that same logic to my actual life, right? So like, okay, well, instead of so I looked at myself as if I'm a agent in a role playing game, and I was like, okay, what skills do I want to have, right? What experiences do I want to have? How do I upgrade those skills, and how do I play those levels, right? Like
I think that
there's a weird sort of like a similarity there.
um, there was a um, there was a beautiful YouTube video about that. Um, I don't remember the channel. It's a very famous channel. Casually explained.
Okay, right, yeah,
And they say like your life is a video game, and
yeah,
they show like how you can say also depending on the static condition, whether you are born in developed country or non-developed country, you get this kind of starter bonus, and then
yeah.
at different levels over time. And it's just a comic, like but it's a whole video, like
Actually,
10 minutes
explain is
maybe.
amazing. It's so
Yeah,
they're so
and
funny.
they yeah, it would basically talking about this. But I think the similarity is more on the practical side, like also again for the entropy principle. If a gamer did not trigger your reward system and did not make you want to play it, you will not play it, and then you will not be having this discussion.
Hmm.
So the fact you play the game and you get addicted to the game is because the game is designed to trigger an addiction, because the creator wanted to play the game. Um, so I think it's more like a similarity on a practical level rather than a kind of epistemological level.
Right. So I mean, okay, let's go on different tangents. So you've been working a lot on robotics, right?
Yeah,
Like building. So I can see the hand behind you in.
yeah. Actually, it's funny because I say that I was always in robotics since I was like really, really young, 5, 6 year old. Of course, then could not do much. Then I started doing a bit more electronic at 10, 11. But robotics, especially at the high level, is really expensive. So that's something that you can do a little bit at home. Okay, like also that one, but at some point it does become too expensive if you want to do like something really professional. And robotics, that's one of the problems of robotics now, that is still very expensive, and also breaks down all the time. But I had an amazing opportunity, and this is like I think it's nice to talk about it, because when looking for different software that I was using for robotics, I end up with a software called YARP, which is yet another robot platform, which is a software, well, framework to do a lot of things for robotics, mostly at a low level, like to allow communication between different processes and different apps, and connect them together, just to basically manage large robotics projects. But this project was managed by a guy, Paul Fitzpatrick, who did his PhD with Rodney Brooks at MIT, so one of the world's top roboticists, and by Giorgio Metta, who did his PhD at MIT, and then was working back then at the Italian Institute of Technology, and now actually since 2 years, I think, he's actually the director of the Italian Institute of Technology. And I remember because got involved in that project, and then I found that they 1 or 2 years earlier, it was I was 16 at that time, and about a few years earlier, they started doing some summer school about the iCab human robot, which is a really advanced, like 300,000 euro human robot. And they were building the summer school around this big European Union project to do work on this robot. I say, whoa, it would be so cool to go there. But it was like 1,300 euro to stay there for like 10 days of the summer school, and I was 16, so I could not ask my parents not to pay that much money. So I was involved in this software project, and I started asking, so I found the summer school to be really cool to attend, but 16 and they also don't have funding. And say, yeah, but you see that you're writing a lot of code for this project. It would be actually, I think that you will actually be a really good candidate for this summer school. Say, really cool. And then the next year I managed to go, and then I was 18-year-old, and I managed to get there, and actually went back like 3 or 4 times. And imagine me at 18 getting access to this super cool human robot. I could play with it, make demos, and do any sort of really cool stuff on an actual very advanced human robot. And I met a lot of really amazing people, and it was one of the best summer school I've ever been.
So what's the
So
AI and robotics? Do you like what's the synergy there? I mean, it's obvious you want to have intelligent
I think
robots,
the question maybe is more about reinforcement learning
right?
than robotics.
So it's like so. First question is about intelligence and having a body.
Mm-hmm.
How important do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it is extremely important, not necessarily because of embodied intelligence, as most people will say, even though it is very important. I think uh, the most important aspect is more practical. So when we do robotics, especially for reinforcement learning and deep learning are really slow. They take a lot of they need a lot of data. I think it's because we are kind of skipping the step of evolution that encode a lot of information in our brains, but it still takes a lot of data. So you cannot put these models, these algorithms directly in the robot and have it learn in the real world, because learning this stuff by reinforcement learning would usually take like more than 100 years in simulation. So that would be impractical in the real world. So we use simulation. However, when you create a simulation, and there are a lot of tricks then to make it work in the real world. However, when you make a simulation, you have to kind of define what objects are there, what are the possible interactions between the robot and the object, and you're kind of limited, right? So imagine you are like a caveman, and you are building tools, from stone. So you take two stones together, you smash them together with special technique that is actually really hard to do, to make some flakes, and then hitting the rocks in a special way, you can make like an axe, for example, from out of one of the rocks. Now this, you cannot do it in a simulation. You can do it in a simulation if you introduce this behavior. So you design that there are these objects like these rocks, and you define them to be able to break. But then you have to make a model that's kind of like a finite element analysis, like we do in engineering, which is really computation expensive. And then your simulation becomes really slow. So I think that simulation in this case are limited because they don't let the robot do too many things, right? But if a robot is interacting with the real world, and especially if the robot has a complex enough body, then the number of possible tasks it can do is basically unbounded. And that means that this richness in tasks is, I think, is extremely important to develop an intelligence is general instead of narrow, and also that is more higher intelligence. And I also think that many tasks do share a lot of common structure. For example, in the basic way, motor control, how to control your hands in a dexterous way. Once you can control your hands in a dexterous way, you can do a lot of things with your hands. You can manipulate objects, build new objects, move objects around. But all these tasks require the same type of motor primitives, of motor action to be learned. So the more tasks you learn, actually, the less you have to learn about the new task when you learn the new task. Okay, so
Right.
you can actually manifest higher intelligence because you become better at all tasks. We see the same in multitask learning. When you do standard deep learning, like with images, if the same neural network has multiple output heads, like multiple output layers, one to classify images, one to like the category, one to do semantic segmentation, and one to do foreground background separation, um, because you share the most of the network, all these tasks send more reward, more great, more training signal. Like they have more informative gradients that get backpropagated in the shared pattern network,
Mhm.
and this makes the common pattern network, like imagine the convolutional filters, learn more general type of connections rather than connections that are only specific to that one task. And we can see sometimes in reinforcement learning, you can see that an agent learns to solve a task, and then you look at what happened in its filters, and you can see that those filters are very task specific. So if you were to use it for a different task, they will not be very useful. And also, if a piece of information is not relevant for the task, then you find that there are no neurons in network that actually learn to encode that piece of information. But if in order to solve a task, you need to learn something specific, like the size of an object in order to manipulate it, then you can actually find some neurons in network that encode that variable, because it was useful to learn to recognize, that specific type of
So,
feature
so
in the book.
um, just I'll just ask a general question. Is that so? At this point, do you think, let's say, something like AGI is just an engineering problem, or do we need like some fundamental new understandings of
Um,
physics or mathematics
I
to?
think we still need some components, but I don't think we are that far away. An example is, even though in this case a bit taken a bit out of context, is the bitter lesson by Richard Sutton, which is one of the main leaders in reinforcement learning, the one who created the field of reinforcement learning, and that is that even when you create new and better algorithms, in the end, the simplest algorithm, when given, when we give them more compute power, the simplest algorithms always perform better. So the idea is that in the past decades we did improve our algorithms and we achieved better performance. Then we got more compute power, and we found that the easiest algorithms were actually still the most performing because we were actually scaling more. So the idea is that if you have a simple system, a simple algorithm that, however, keeps improving in performance, the more compute power you give it, you will always do better than a system that works better now but does not scale.
Right.
And this is the same, for example, gradient-based learning. Why it is effective? It's not because of something magical. It's that when you frame learning as an optimization problem, which is a big open question in the field, so we don't know for sure if the human brain learns by maximizing an objective. I think it does. I mean, in that line, also like I think kind of like the Anderson line, but it's not proven and not agreed on in the field. So it's kind of like a personal opinion. But if you think of that, then all optimization problem, if you have access to gradients, you can always do better than if you don't have access to gradients. So in that case, I think that the gradient-based learning will have an important role in AGI as well, more for this kind of practical reason. However, I do think that the biggest change that is required and is not done much now is that people say that deep learning is not like human learning, and of course, it's not. It's talking more about the functional level, right? But the main difference about people saying that deep learning is not a realistic model of learning is that it takes a lot of data because it is based on statistical learning.
Mm-hmm.
I actually don't agree with this statement because we are kind of comparing a neural network that starts from blank state with random weights and has to learn to solve a visual classification task from scratch, and we compare it to a human that whose brain and nervous system has got like 500 millions of time in evolution, in which evolution has encoded a lot of information, both in terms of actual content, like kind of rough initial connectivity, and also in terms of algorithm. So we are designed to be a good meta learner. So we
So
are designed
is
by
there
evolution to be good at learning fast.
is there I mean thought or uh, any science in could in terms of how to get that meta learning, like the millions
Yeah.
of is of evolution out of us and put it into a machine?
Yeah, so it is in a couple of different ways. The meta learning algorithms for now are still not, no, they are really impressive, but they're still kind of limited because they are gradient based and become a second order optimization problem that becomes very tricky to compute in practice and also very computation intensive. However, we are finding better ways to do it. For example, using derivative free optimization. That's what I'm working on. There is one thing, however, I would like to talk about, and that's called the Baldwin effect, which I think kind of exemplifies this relation between meta learning and learning across evolution or within your lifetime. So, Baldwin effect is a type of learning. Well, it's a kind of a relation between basically it talks about the evolution of agents that can learn. Okay, so they can adapt to the environment. And it was following. So, if you have a static environment, so nothing changes, each agent is capable of learning after reaching that point in evolution. Then, within the lifetime of each agent will learn a certain set of skills. But because the environment is stationary, most of them will still end up learning the same set of skill, like how to hunt, for example. But if the environment does not change, it is actually really expensive to keep a nervous system. So there is an evolutionary pressure to kind of make these behaviors innate. There is that if you are born with kind of a primitive innate behavior that is what you would have learned otherwise in that environment, you don't have to learn it, which means that one, you save time. So if it is about defending yourself from wild animals, you can do it even if you are young instead of possibly risking dying before you learn it. And two, you can afford fewer resources in the system because learning is not really useful because you just have to memorize this innate behavior of evolution and you will do well in your environment. The point is that if the environment is not static, so if it's not stationary but it changes over time slowly, then it is useful to have a nervous system because if you are born in a new environment, then you have to be able to adapt your behavior to the new environment. But it is that if consistently each agent in each generation ends up learning the same type of skill, or change their system in a certain way to adapt to the environment, that change, if it is consistent, it is better to encode it as innate behavior or as genetically, because it's something that you always end up learning, and it's more efficient to have it already provided by when you're born instead of having to learn from scratch.
So
Um,
DNA is sort of like so how would you conceptualize DNA in that sense? Like it's just like a
I mean, that's like a more implementation thing. The relation between DNA and development of the brain is extremely complicated. And it's not also not my field. So I will not be able to tell how it is done
no no no
in
what I
practice.
mean is like just
But we say that, but
like
we do say it experimentally, right? Because this kind of explains very nicely all the difference between innate behaviors and learning and nervous systems, and there are computer simulations about it as well.
no, so I was just curious about sort of why DNA would have evolved, right? Or like survived. But like it's a great way of transferring previously learned knowledge to the
Yeah. So in that case, it's kind of like a way to make evolution more Lamarckian instead of like Darwinian. Now, of course, we know that Lamarckian evolution is not what evolution looks like, but according to the Baldwin effect, that is one way in which evolution can actually behave kind of a bit more Lamarckian. And again, it is observed. So it is a known phenomenon. There are still a lot of debate about it, even though it's a very old theory. But it become very popular in machine learning because it does fit kind of nicely. These two levels of learning or multiple level of learning, and not all learning now intended as optimization happens within your lifetime by changing your nervous system. A type of learning optimization is also performed by evolution, again without an objective, just that if you if some of these aspects can increase the fitness, or the chance of the survival of the agent or the chance of reproduction, then there is an advantage to have those kind of characteristics encoded in somehow in your DNA, such that you will have those characteristics in the next generation, or in the future.
So,
Uh,
uh, so when you're working on, so in your work in robotics, right?
yeah.
What are you trying to achieve in terms of like what do you want to get done?
Well, there are two things I want to do with robotics. One is that, again, we need to work in simulation for practical reasons. I don't think we can really get away from that, for especially at least in some initial training. And then there is a class of methods called sim to real, which is how you transfer the behavioral length simulation to the real robot. Now, this does not always work because the simulation, even if it is very accurate, is still different than reality. You don't model the temperature of the air or the density of the air, or a lot of other factors, or minor imperfections in the body of the robot. And all these can lead to errors that compound at each time step. So basically, a simulation and the real robot do diverge really quickly. That's called the reality gap. So there are methods to try to make, to fix this problem and to try to train a simulation, but then use the trained model, the trained neural network into the physical robot. And I think that one way to do it would be using meta learning. If you can encode this kind of priors in order to make the agent be good at learning faster. So that's one of the main applications of meta learning. It's kind of a few shot learning. And you can imagine sim2real as a few shot learning task in which the agent is doing a simulation such that when it is put in the real world, it is given, say, 5 minutes of trials. But after doing those 5 minutes of trial in the real world, then it learns to perform the task in the real world. Okay, and you can model this. But this is also still connected to what we were discussing about the amount of prior information embedded by evolution before you start learning, or before you are born, and what you learn after you're born. So the idea would be to do the evolutionary step, even though it does not have much in common with evolution. It's more like on a functional level. But you can imagine encoding this evolutionary optimization process in simulation that you can do on a supercomputer, and then do the actual within lifetime learning, on the physical robot.
So,
Now there is sorry,
yeah, go
only
ahead.
one thing, because this is actually connected to another concept that is gaining traction in these years, which is called foundation models. So it's the same idea, just with a different name, and applied to standard supervised learning instead of reinforcement learning. And this is, for example, GPT-3. So what are people doing now? They are building these massive models, trained on a lot of data, and trained on a supercomputer. And even a supercomputer can take months to train. Okay, but after you train this model has a lot of parameters, and we know that models that are heavily overparameterized can also generalize better. And this model can actually be very powerful on tasks that are very different than the one they were trained on. So you can do fine tuning on GPT-3 for your specific task. And that is something similar to the robot when you first train in simulation using a supercomputer, but then you are given the final model, and then you fine tune it on your own task. So that would be like the learning in the real world. But it's very powerful because it means that we do the step, kind of this step of made by evolution, to encode a lot of information. Like in GPT-3 would be like the structure of language, or a lot of statistics about language, and you do it once using a lot of compute power. But then you have this basic starting model that is in this kind of a very loose analogy, that is like an individual after he's born, and then you can actually train it in with very little data, and it's much faster
So that's fun.
learning
So
new tasks.
that's kind of like so when a human's born, and then like well, assuming that they have a reasonable life and family, whatever, right? Or like whatever in any situation, they're born, and they like for the first 18-ish years, they're trained on the supercomputer called culture,
No, I would say that supercomputer would be the evolution before, so before you're even born.
Oh, right, right, right. Yes. Okay.
And then what you learn, as a kid, it's important, but less important. Okay, when you're really young, it's really important. But my guess would be that the amount of information you can encode in the DNA is really small. I think like what was it, like 1 gigabit of information or something like that, or on that order of magnitude, if I remember correctly. While the brain, has hundreds of trillion of connections, so you cannot really, encode each connection or each algorithm. So you have to do a very high amount of compression of the information. So one way to compress the information is to this is if I'm in unsupervised learning or with self-organizing system. If you encode only the basic rules for the brain and the basic algorithms and the basic overall connectivity, because of the rules of self-organization that develop according to the rules specified in the DNA, you always end up getting the same pattern. For example, in the primary visual cortex, we have things called ocular dominance columns and orientation columns. So basically, if you look at your primary visual cortex at the back of your head, and you look at the activity of neurons when you are looking with your left eye and right eye and see which one is the dominant one for that neuron, you see that there is a very specific pattern and made with stripes. And if you look at each neuron and see what is the preferred orientation of a line that they respond to, because that's the main thing, one of the main response in the primary cortex, you see that they organize in a very smooth way with a very special pattern that is very well known in the field. So it is that your DNA is not specifying that pattern. Your brain is your DNA is specifying some rules, of self-organization. And during your infancy, you experience the world in kind of an unsupervised way, and that simply observing the world leads to creating these patterns in your brain. Okay? Because that's the only way, the only thing that will arise when given certain input statistics and behaving and self-organizing according to this set of rules.
So if you take
So
a infant and you put them inside a sphere with no
yes,
edges.
yeah, they did it when they could, like I think in early 1900 when there were no ethic, review boards. They did an experiment with kittens, and they put them with some, I think, like some head fixture or something, so they could not turn the head. No, they could not rotate the head. They could only keep it straight. And they put them in an environment with only vertical stripes, so no other orientations. Then they looked at their brain, and there's a critical time in kitten of like 2 weeks. And they looked at the neurons in the prefrontal cortex and see what lines they were selective to. And they did not find the pattern I was telling you before. They would only find neurons selected to vertical lines or horizontal because of the horizon.
Mhm.
So in that case, the experience, just by looking at the world, did produce a different pattern of self-organization because the statistics of what is in those images changed. Because instead of being overall random oriented lines of all orientation, you only had vertical lines. But this is the idea that if you know that by self-organization, if nature has certain statistical pattern and you apply certain self-organization rule to the brain, if you know by evolution that you will always end up getting that pattern or that pattern of connections, you don't need to specify those connections one by one. You only need to specify the self-organizing rule, and then you will get that pattern always, or like 99.999% of the time. Now, there probably are pathological, pathologies that would affect this kind of self-organization, and then you will have some, some type of damage.
So
But
so
it will happen in a very small part of the population.
in that sense, like, so do you think it's actually, so this idea of trying to represent the world in a way that like in a way that can be implemented in a machine or something? Do you think the idea of representing the world is it sounds like it's kind of pointless or slash difficult, right? Like trying to get a
But what do you mean by representing the world?
so and again actually like so let's say you want to get an agent to behave in the free world, like in the natural world, right? Um, how do you like? Do you think trying to give that robot or like an agent an idea of what the world is like and what to do in that world internally
Um,
is useful?
well, I would say not explicitly. I think that there is an advantage in including like prior information explicitly. We did it for CNNs, the convolutional neural networks. One of the reasons we suspect they work so well is because, well, the visual system is doing it as well. But in general, we know that the information images has this local structure. So by imposing this local connectivity by convolution instead of using fully connected networks, does have an advantage because it reflects, kind of the physics of the world. So in that case, it is very effective. To actually include information about the world like gravity, I think it will not be that useful. I think as long as we make a realistic world enough for a simulation, then the agents or this evolutionary process would learn to encode what is actually useful. And what's actually useful may not be what you think it is useful. We see it, for example, when you did in standard machine learning and do feature engineering, and then you do end-to-end learning with deep learning that learns the features by itself. You see that you always do better than when you hand engineer the features, because by doing statistical learning, the algorithm can find a better, can actually find what is actually important, in the data more than you can. So you can think that this information about the world is important, but when the actually robot is solving a task, you might actually find that that is not really that useful.
So what kind
But
of
other things you
so let's talk about Boston Robotics, those crazy robots, right?
yeah, they
Um,
are doing standard control, not even deep learning actually.
okay, okay. So yeah,
So they're
so
doing like
like I'm not. I think I saw that like Spot is there has some industrial
the dog,
use,
yeah,
has some industrial
yeah.
use, but like,
Mhm.
do they make like commercially usable moving robots?
I think so. So I don't know how commercially, but definitely you can buy it at least. Like, but the Spot Mini, which is a smaller of the dog, is still 80,000 euro. So it's not very uh,
Right.
usable in practice. And the main robot, I think, is called Atlas. It's I don't even know if the cost is known, but it probably like in the 100,000s. But that's common with most robotics. That's why there are a lot of trends, for example, using 3D printing or plastics instead of CNC machined metal. It's a big advantage, even though the robot is more fragile,
Right.
but it becomes much cheaper to produce,
So
and also using cheaper motors. But it's still really hard.
so let's talk about the future, like robotics in the real world in the future,
Mm.
right? Like so, we have the sci-fi future. Like, I mean, what do you think? Like, what kind of future do you think includes robotics, like, and how
I
far is it?
think, yeah, I think robots will and have to be widespread because we have a lot of AI system, even if people don't realize. For example, in your phone you have Siri, or you have voice recognition, image recognition, all the things that are intelligent behavior because they solve a task. No, they perform a task that would otherwise require human to do. So that's also artificial intelligence, even though most people don't realize it. However, we are still limited because yeah, if you can create an interface like a microphone, it's easy. Okay, so you don't need much hardware. You put your phone, you put the microphone, then you send either on a neural chip on your phone, or you send the recording to a server, and then it gets processed. But when you actually want to do intelligence for in actual behavior, and that's where reinforcement learning comes by. You need to have a body. So if you want to do a task, could be self-driving, could be a factory, could be a home assistant robot or something. If you want your system to interact with the physical world, it has to have some type of body, or a robot in the general sense of having sensors and actuators to kind of interact with the world. The problem is that there are a lot of reasons why robots are still not that widespread in the real world. I think two reasons are particularly important. One is that it's cost, so they're really expensive to produce them, and even the cheapest are still not thousands of euros. And also connected to that is that robots, especially the motors, break very often. So if you have a robot running for 24 hours, you most likely break at least one motor just to burn out. And replacement can be expensive or may require an expert. So that also limit the durability. And the second biggest problem, however, is that robots work well in constrained environments, like in factories, because you can forecast every possible situation that can happen. But if you put a robot in your home, that's a completely unconstrained environment. And the robot has to be able to adapt to your house, for example, and also has to be able to change its behavior to react to unexpected circumstances. Okay, so for example, um, uh, yeah, okay, imagine that you train this robot in an apartment, and then you get to a house where there are stairs. Okay, and the robot has never seen stairs. or even just like in different images, different levels of luminance, illumination, or different type of objects to interact with, and you basically get in a world with almost unbounded combination of situations, and the agent has to learn to be able to perform well in all the situations.
Right.
So in order to do it, I think that the agent has to have some capacity to adapt and to learn, to the new environment, but also to be more robust. So you cannot do this with traditional robotics method, because traditional computer vision, or even with deep learning for computer vision, you cannot make a model that takes objects and then encode a behavior based on that, because maybe you find a new object that you never forecasted before. So the robot still has to have, to be able to change its whole behavior and to keep learning in the new environment.
So what about Tom Shiv about this? So what about this Tesla bot? Is this going to happen or no?
I think it's only hype. Elon Musk is. I don't like his ideas and his philosophy, but of course, I do have a good esteem of him because he's a very, very hard achiever. But he's also known to underestimate the complexity of tasks. And human robotics is an incredibly difficult task, and also again can be very expensive for a lot of reasons. So I think that the idea to build an actual, utopian human robot out of nowhere, it's completely unrealistic. Now he's putting a lot of money, so he will definitely achieve something, but not even like 1% as close as what he thinks he wants to do, because again it's a really hard topic. But hopefully we get some advances in the field
Yeah,
by this.
I think the
Putting money in the field is always a good way to make it advance.
I think it's useful, right? Like I think it's useful for someone to be out there to try to do these insane, crazy
Yeah,
things.
yeah, I agree.
And
Again, I think that the chance to success are small, but in the process, he could actually probably end up getting something useful. Okay, so even if he does not achieve his objective, he might still do something cool,
yeah,
or something that in the end would be useful. Could be like maybe designing better, cheaper, and more reliable motors. Could
right.
be designing better algorithms. Can be a lot of things.
Yeah, so actually,
Um,
I heard him talk about. I heard him talk on. I think it was
Lex
Lex
Friedman.
Friedman, yeah,
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
was talking about a lot of the work, for example, they do at Tesla is like I don't know, like building new C compilers that are faster and more efficient. So it's like okay, I mean that's useful, right? So, I mean
Yeah, yeah,
they
exactly. Yeah.
can bring a lot of
So
benefit. Like even I mean there are so many NASA technology spin-offs that have benefited so many people, right? So I
yeah,
think
yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, absolutely. I just think the whole idea of the Tesla board will be like be able to do basically everything human can do, like a magical human robot.
I
It's
didn't know he was claiming those. I just saw the video. I didn't know he was claiming.
Yeah, it just yeah, but the video also makes it look like that the robot is already here.
Yeah,
But that's like I think in the presentation it was actually a person in the suit, just to give you an idea of what it could look like. But yeah, everybody is good not to put on a suit of a fake robot and act it. It's like the old Mechanical Turk. I think that in practice we have not seen not even like a partial demo of anything about the hardware except the artist rendering of the mockup
so okay,
of what
so
it could
what
look
about
like.
Neuralink? What do we think about that?
Neuralink, I like it. I think that it will not be successful because it is too early. But it will produce a lot of technology that to be useful in the future. Um, uh, but I think that it's still about so as an interface, it's really good. So when you interact with the computer, even if you're really fast at tapping on a keyboard and moving the mouse, you're wasting a lot of time, right? If you could just think the text you want to type, that would be as fast as it gets. But merging computers and machine, as I was saying before, I think it's only like a short term thing that will not have an impact in the very long term of our civilization. It will only be useful for a short while.
Okay, well that's no. I think that's his answer to try and avoid the AI catastrophe, right? He would just like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
let's just merge with the computer and like I would not be
yeah. But,
surprised.
but at some point, if you keep increasing the intelligence of your machine counterpart that you merge with, at some point, what is that the human brain is adding to the mixer?
Mhm. Yeah,
Why is it better than the machine alone? Again, provided a lot of asterisk about how the machine works, its drives and everything. But at some point, there is a point in which we are a liability for the
for
machine.
me,
We are not adding anything to
yeah,
the machine.
like for me, I'm not even thinking about AI. I'm thinking about sort of medical use, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
it would
Yeah.
be amazing. Like for example, because so we take, I mean, it's like psychiatric medication is, pretty
Yeah,
widespread
yeah,
around
yeah,
the world, right? But
yeah. No, but
it's so untargeted, and it's so like uncalibrated, right? So let's say you're on an anxiety medication. You take the same amount of medication every day, regardless of
yeah,
how
yeah.
the
No, but
anxiety is.
they do it for example, with the deep brain stimulation, for example. So yeah, that's definitely a very interesting and very useful direction into which it will go. Another one is what we did also in my college before. We have some papers about it. We do like for neuroprosthetics when you have like a prosthetic hand, and you want to interact it, to interface with the nervous system, even though it's peripheral nervous system, to not only capture the motor commands to control the motors, in a realistic way, but also to give feedback about, for example, restoring the sense of touch. Okay, and this we do it, and for this interface, I think that it's good to mimic the neural code, like using spiking neurons. Otherwise, I think spiking neurons are not will not be very useful. But in this case, when you interface yourself with the nervous system, it's definitely useful.
I mean, it would
So I
be
think that
amazing to to go open your app and just turn down anxiety before you go to sleep, right?
I think that in some sense that could be achievable. It does take a lot. It still take a lot of time, but that could be achievable, I guess.
Because one of the reasons medications for their brain, like they say, psychotropic drugs,
Yeah.
it's so useful is because we physically, the only way to get to those parts of the brain that are inside the deep parts of the brain is
Mhm.
through the bloodstream, right?
Yeah.
And through the blood-brain barrier. But it's so untargeted, like it just hits everywhere at the same time. So it'd be great to have some targeted therapies there.
Yeah. So one second. Need to go. Can I go for 5 minutes?
Yeah,
Come back in a
yeah,
second.
I'll pause. Yeah,
Just a little break.
yeah, no problem.
Then we continue.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we're back. We're back. All
Yeah.
right. So, man, this has been like this has been like such a tour of just all kinds of weird things that I like to think about. But I do want to be respectful of your time. So you've given me an hour and a
Oh
half.
yeah.
That's I agree. So, but okay, I'm gonna let you go soon. But before that, I have a couple of questions, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so first question is if so, if someone for people who want to get involved with robotics, they
Mhm.
they could be young people or like someone old like me. Like so, what say just say from high school, what do you think a good trajectory is in terms of getting into this?
Well, robotics is a massive field, so there are a lot of ways one can get involved. There's more traditional robotics, which is mostly control theory. There is the hardware part, like mechatronics, or there's the AI part, but the AI part can take also a lot of forms. I'm in the camp deep reinforcement learning, so in that case I'm very biased. But we can apply AI in other ways. You can just use standard CNNs to make a vision model and then interface them with other components that you can design, or I don't know. Um, in my case, I think that deep reinforcement learning is extremely important for robotics. It's the natural interface between everything good we have with deep learning and learning behavior, and then putting into practice with robotics. And you see, we did see massive improvements in the capacity, in the capabilities of robots when using deep reinforcement learning versus traditional methods. So I think it is very promising. The problem is that it takes a lot of time to train, so we need to resort to simulation. So if a young person were interested in this part of, like in this side of the topic for the future, I think that they could already start playing with a lot of software that is available to train these agents in simulation. So starting with deep reinforcement learning in simple tasks, and then with libraries like Mujoko or Isaac Jim, they can train robots even on complex tasks in simulation. And usually nowadays they can do some of these tasks even on a single GPU on a single computer. So that would definitely be a way to learn about the most advanced technology we have now
So
for
could you just
robotics.
tell me a couple of those examples you just said, so I put them in the description later?
For example, well, one is Isaac Jim. It's not easy to use. It's kind of like a very preview, really pre-release, so it's a kind of immature, but it's also very fast. Otherwise, Mujoko is a very famous library. Now DeepMind bought it.
Mojako.
Um,
What about OpenAI's Gym? Don't they have some gyms?
yeah, but Jim is really only about a software interface. So it's only to set a standard to
Right.
how to define environments. The actual environments in Jim are significantly deprecated. So people use them, as a simple baselines on on algorithms for reinforcement learning, but they are not interesting or useful per se.
Right. Okay.
Uh,
Okay. Cool. Okay.
um,
And so
the other thing would be
right.
to play with Arduino and the likes and simple robots, because in the end you can do robotics in simulation. It was all nice and fun, but when you start working in the real world, you get a lot of problems. In simulation, you have a reinforcement learning agent, so you can take a step in the environment by selecting an action and get the new state and so on and so forth. In the real world, if you select an action, you have some delays because the commander has well, you get like a picture from the camera, then you have to complete an action. That requires usually a neural network, and your network will take maybe 50 milliseconds to get an answer. And then after you get this answer, you have to send to the motor. But by the time you send to the motor control board, then the motor control board activates the motor. Then there is a physical time, a time due to physics, that the motor receives the command, but it's not moving immediately to the position, right? It is moving, it starts accelerating. Then that movement also takes time. So in the end, between the time you observe a state and want to select an action, and the time in which the action is actually physically executed in the physical world, there is a time delay, and this time delay could also be random. So meaning that it could be a random variable. So it could be like 50 milliseconds on average, but maybe there is standard deviation of like 5-10 milliseconds, and that can affect the behavior that's been learned in simulation quite considerably. So it means that if you want to make a simulation more realistic, you have to model these effects as well.
Right.
And then you interact with the robot, and then you play with it for half an hour, and one motor breaks.
Right.
Then you have to stop the experiment and change it. So playing with electronics, even just with an Arduino, I think is a good way to get acquainted with these practical issues, so
Nice.
that you're aware of them.
Okay, and so there's two more questions. So like what do you think in terms of let's not talk about millions of years, but the next 100 years, like what kind of world do you think it's like what kind of world would you like to look forward to? Would you like to see emerge?
Yeah, I have no idea. I do hope that 100 years from now, it seems a lot of time. Um, and in advanced science technology can also do a lot of stuff. But even when science and technology develops so fast, again, we still have this problem with biology that you know you have current people, and current people are very difficult to change their mind, right? So you, after a certain age, and I don't speak about when you're actually old. I speak even just at 25, 30 year old, you already have your kind of ideas, and it's very hard to change them. And even with changes in technology, people will not use the new technology and the likes. But I'm thinking more on the cultural level. So there are things like democracy that take a lot of time to get assimilated, or for development of a country. So I think that there will be a lot of changes in the world, but many changes require a significant change in mentality and in culture and in education that take many generations to happen. Because first you have to get the new ideas up to the public. Then these ideas have to convince people, like the ruling people, to change maybe the teaching curricula. And then you get start educating new generations with the new ideas. And then a bit at a time the overall mentality and culture of the world changes. But I think that is the most limiting factor to our progress as a civilization right now. And the fact that it's a bit disappointing that it is it did not happen that fast,
So
because again you need many generations.
what's the worst case outcome? Say 100 years, like what's an outcome you think would be
Oh
horrible?
well, I would say that the chance of us exterminating ourselves is actually pretty high. Not high as 80-90%, but maybe as high as okay, no, this is just a complete guess, because of course we have no way to say. I would say that maybe 10-20% chance that we self go extinct within the next 100 years. I think it would be maybe a bit high estimate, but I would not say that it would be unrealistic. So in the worst case scenario, we probably go extinct because of ourselves, not because of external things like an asteroid or something. Um, However, every time you can see things going bad, you can also see that there is a tendency of humanity to kind of reach an equilibrium. So we always tend to reach a kind of a safer compromise in the end. So maybe we managed to survive.
Yeah, good. I mean, I hope so. Like I did generally hope so. All right. Well,
I just think that it would be really sad
yeah.
to. So, I mean, passionate about the Fermi paradox and civilization in the universe. And I'm pretty sure that, out of statistical reason and also because we are not that special, I'm pretty sure that the universe is definitely teeming with life, definitely unicellular life at least, but most likely also intelligent civilization. The problem is that until we find one intelligent civilization, and by the way, another civilization could also be worse than us. Okay, so until we find another intelligent civilization, we have to assume that we are the only one. Not because we are, because I'm pretty sure we are not. But if we were, and we went to go extinct, because we kill ourselves, it would be really sad. Because we, even if I think that conscience is kind of an illusion, it's we still kind of interested to have this self-organizing matter at some point reach this kind of level of intelligence and complexity. And if we actually were the only intelligent civilization in the universe, it would be extremely sad if we killed ourselves or if we
Absolutely.
got extinct.
I, 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 I agree with you.
So I feel that it would be useful to have kind of this backup, like intelligent life, synthetic life, as a backup. Because if something goes wrong and we actually go extinct, I would feel better knowing that at least some part of us survives.
I agree. Well, that's a hopeful message. And on that note, I think that's a good place to wrap it up because that was great. But this has been incredible. Like we'll have to do this again because like your breadth of knowledge is astounding. So we'll have to come back and like maybe dig down on one of the things you talked about today. So it was really 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 interesting. And I thank you.
It was a lot of fun to speak with you.
Thank you. It's been great. Like gave me a lot to think about, and hopefully the people who listen to it also have something to think about. And I didn't even get to. I wanted to talk to you more about like fundamental like mathematics stuff, but we'll get to this some other time. But again, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you being here, and I'll see you around. I'll see you on campus. I'll see you in class, I guess. And yeah, great. I'll catch you later, boys.
Thanks a lot. Bye. Goodbye.
Thank you for joining me in this conversation. I hope you got something out of it. And until next time.